Welcome to day 12 of the 28-day photo challenge. Today, we're going to be looking at the golden ratio. Now, this is very similar to the rule of thirds in how you have to position things in the photo, but we're also going to be looking at the golden ratio to try and get somewhat of a pleasing photo in terms of what we're shooting or how it's laid out.
Golden ratio and rule of thirds are very similar to each other. So you can kind of see that I have the rule of thirds on, like you can see the lines on the screen. But the golden ratio, or the phi ratio, actually involves a little bit of math. So if we zoom in, so that way we have the shipping container on one side, line it up right about here, take a picture. On that picture, there's going to be math. So we can take a 1 by 1 square and multiply that by itself, which is 2. Then we take the 1 by 1 square and the 2 by 2 square and multiply that, and we get 3. Then we take the 2 plus 3, which is 5, and the 5 plus 3, which is 8, and the 8 plus 5, which is 13. 13 plus 8 is 21, and then 21 plus 13 is 34. Now when all of those are lined up, that gives us the golden ratio, or the golden curve. Now if you take the golden ratio and then rotate it by 180 degrees, that'll give us the phi ratio, which is very similar to rule of thirds, but it's moved in slightly towards the center. Now you pretty much handle it the exact same way that you would with the rule of thirds, but you have to use negative space to pull in toward what you're trying to take a shot of. If I were to take a shot here, then I'm going to want to pull in to where I'm taking a picture of. Now the golden ratio is going to be a little bit in from where it normally would be, and then around to this corner with the label, and the rest happening toward the corner. Now I still have rule of thirds on, so I'm just going by eye for where I believe the golden ratio would be. And now that's a picture using golden ratio as opposed to rule of thirds. Now the reason golden ratio is so important is because it naturally happens through pretty much everything. You can see golden ratio almost anywhere, and it's always a multiplication of two numbers. So for instance, to use only two aspects of golden ratio, we have to look at the live view in the form of those blocks. So if we take a 1 by 1 square on this side, multiply it 1 by 1 square. So that means that half of the frame this way is going to be the two 1 by 1 squares. On this side here, we want to have something that is going to take up roughly half of the frame. Now, with that, we can get a little bit closer. And now the way I have this set up is that the sky is taking up roughly a 1 by 1 square, the ground is taking up a 1 by 1 square, and the container is taking up a 2 by 2 square. Now this right here is still golden ratio, and you can keep doing it over and over. We can do one side of the picture that is a 2 by 2 square, and the other side is a 3 by 3, or 3 by 3, 5 by 5. And we can keep doing that throughout the entire picture to capture whatever we want using the golden ratio. That pretty much wraps it up for the golden ratio, or the phi square, phi rectangle, the golden rectangle. There's so many different names for it, but it all ends up being the same thing, which is just a multiplication of the same number over and over until you get to some kind of ratio that always multiplies itself with the previous number. So that's pretty much it. The golden ratio is just math, and then you just split the screen or your viewfinder up into the equation that you get using 1 by 1 squares. Well, not exactly 1 by 1 squares, because the golden ratio is actually a slightly different aspect ratio to 16 by 9, which is pretty much what all cameras shoot in by default now. So you take your 1 by 1 square in a 16 by 9 ratio and then kind of move it out from there. So it's a little bit stretched from how it would normally be, which is why it's kind of by eye. And I'm not actually using like the phi grid, I'm using rule of thirds, but it's just simple math. 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. 5 plus 8 is 13. 13 plus 8 is 21. And 21 plus 13 is 34. And like you can just keep going to make this absolutely massive golden ratio. But usually in photography terms, you don't need more than that, because anything after that point than your 1 by 1 square really isn't like noticeable, because it ends up being so small. Realistically, you can see the golden ratio in pretty much anything. Like just looking right here, right now, this little kind of tree sticking out a little bit into the path, which comes down, that would be like our 34 ratio, and then it comes down into the 21, and then up into the 13, the 8, the 5, the 3, the 2, and then the 1s coming up right by those trees. And you can pretty much do it with anything. So by knowing the golden ratio, or the phi grid, you can pretty much look for anything and get a perfectly framed photo out of it. And that just ends up being one of the easiest ways to start framing photos correctly. Because at that point, it doesn't matter what you're taking a picture of, because if it is framed within the golden ratio, it naturally appeals no matter what. So hopefully you got something out of this. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't, that's cool. Or don't do any of it. I'm not telling you what to do.